What happens when a single piece of antique jewelry becomes the key to unlocking a century of buried sins? What if the woman serving coffee for tips was actually the missing piece of a puzzle that powerful people had killed to keep unsolved? For Katie Sullivan, a 29-year-old waitress struggling to pay her aunt's nursing home bills in small-town Vermont, that moment of recognition came on a quiet autumn evening when she served dinner to a man whose diamond-studded cufflinks would reveal a family secret worth dying for. But one crisp October night, a glittering sapphire would ignite a battle that had been waiting 32 years to be fought. The maples outside Millfield Diner were ablaze with autumn color when the black limousine pulled into the gravel parking lot. Katie Sullivan paused in her restocking of the napkin dispensers, watching through the plate glass windows as a driver in uniform stepped out to open the rear door. In 15 years of working at the diner, she'd never seen anything fancier than a pickup truck in their lot. The man who emerged from the limousine commanded attention without effort. He was tall and distinguished, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His navy suit was immaculate, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and even from a distance, Katie could sense an aura of wealth and authority that seemed out of place in their humble establishment. He entered the diner with measured steps, his sharp grey eyes surveying the red vinyl booths and checkerboard floor with what might have been amusement or disdain. At 29, Katie had been waiting tables long enough to recognize the type. Old. Money, accustomed to five-star service, probably lost on his way to somewhere more exclusive. "Evening," Katie said with her practiced smile as he chose a corner booth. "Welcome to Millfield Diner. Can I start you off with some coffee?" The man settled onto the cracked vinyl seat with careful precision. Coffee would be acceptable. Black. "And perhaps your menu, though I suspect my options are limited." His voice carried the crisp authority of expensive education and inherited privilege. Katie bristled slightly at his tone, but maintained her professional demeanor. Tips were tips, even from condescending millionaires. "Our meatloaf is popular tonight," she offered, setting down a laminated menu. "Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans." "I'll take whatever passes for a club sandwich," he said without looking at the menu. "And the coffee. Quickly, if you don't mind." As Katie turned to go, the man reached for his water glass, and she caught sight of his cufflinks. They were extraordinary, antique platinum set with perfectly matched diamonds that caught the diner's fluorescent lights and threw rainbows across the table. But it wasn't their obvious expense that stopped her cold. It was the design. Each cufflink featured an intricate relief of a sailing ship, its tiny details so precise Katie could make out individual rigging lines and billowing sails. Beneath each ship was an inscription in flowing script, though she couldn't quite make out the words from her angle. Katie's hand flew instinctively to her left shoulder, where beneath her uniform blouse she wore a brooch that had never been far from her body since childhood. A brooch her Aunt Elizabeth had given her on her 16th birthday, claiming it was the only thing left from Katie's mysterious past. A sapphire and diamond piece featuring the exact same sailing ship design, down to the smallest detail of its carved sails. "Excuse me," Katie heard herself saying, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those cufflinks, they're beautiful. Is that a family crest?" The man's head snapped up, his piercing gaze locking onto hers with sudden, sharp interest. The casual dismissal vanished, replaced by something that felt almost predatory. "What did you say?" Katie's heart hammered against her ribs, but she pressed on. "The ship design. I have a brooch with the same pattern. I've never seen another piece like it." A muscle in the man's jaw twitched. He slowly extended his arm, studying the cufflinks, as if seeing them for the first time. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "These cufflinks have been in the Worthington family for 4 generations. They were commissioned from Tiffany in 1923 to commemorate my great-grandfather's shipping empire. The design is unique, exclusive to our family. There are no others. The name Worthington hit Katie like a physical blow. She'd heard it countless times on buildings throughout New England, in newspaper headlines about charitable donations and political influence. The Worthingtons were Boston aristocracy, their fortune built on shipping and textile money, their influence reaching into every corner of New England society. "But there is another," Katie insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "I could show you, miss," the man interrupted, his tone cutting through her words like a blade of ice. "Whatever trinket you possess is either a very poor reproduction or—" He paused, letting the implication hang in the air like a threat. "Perhaps it came into your possession through less than legitimate means." The accusation struck Katie like a slap. Elizabeth Sullivan was the most honest woman she'd ever known, a retired schoolteacher who'd worked 2 jobs to put Katie through high school after taking her in as a frightened 13-year-old. "My aunt is not a thief," Katie said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. The man reached into his jacket and withdrew an alligator leather wallet, extracting several crisp $100 bills and placing them on the table. It was more money than Katie made in a week of double shifts. "For your time and your creative storytelling," he said, standing without having touched his water. "My name is Harrison Worthington. If you or your aunt wish to pursue this matter. Further, my attorneys can be reached through Worthington Holdings." He moved toward the door, then paused, his cold gaze finding hers one final time. "Miss Sullivan, Katie Sullivan. Miss Sullivan, I suggest you forget this conversation ever happened. The Worthington family has no tolerance for opportunists or blackmailers. We protect our legacy by any means necessary." The door closed behind him with a soft chime, leaving Katie standing in the empty diner with the echo of his threat and a growing certainty that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble. Katie didn't sleep that night. She sat on the narrow bed in her small apartment above the diner, staring at the sapphire brooch that had been her most treasured possession for 13 years. In the lamplight, the deep blue stone seemed to pulse with inner fire, while the tiny diamonds outlining the ship's sails glittered like captured stars. She'd always known her origins were murky. Elizabeth had taken her in when she was 13, claiming to be a distant relative after Katie's parents died in what was described only as an accident. There had been no other family, no documentation beyond a hastily signed guardianship agreement, and no explanations about her life before that terrible day. But Elizabeth had given her the brooch on her 16th birthday, along with a story that had always seemed more fairy tale than fact. Katie's mother, Elizabeth claimed, had been someone special, someone from a world of wealth and privilege who had fallen in love with the wrong man and paid the ultimate price. Now, faced with Harrison Worthington's absolute certainty that no other ship existed, Katie began to question everything she'd been told. Elizabeth was 83 now, her mind still sharp but her body frail from the stroke that had put her in Sunset Manor nursing home. At her age, shocking revelations might be more than her heart could handle. Yet Katie couldn't shake the feeling that Elizabeth knew far more than she'd ever admitted. As dawn broke over the Green Mountains, Katie made a decision. She called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and drove to the Millfield Public Library, where she spent the day diving into digital archives and genealogy websites, searching for any connection between the Sullivan and Worthington families. What she found painted a picture of staggering wealth built on a foundation of maritime commerce and shrewd investment. The Worthingtons had arrived in Boston in the 1840s, and within 3 generations had built a shipping empire that dominated New England's ports. They owned textile mills, shipping lines, and vast real estate holdings throughout the Northeast. Their name adorned museums, hospitals, and university buildings from Boston to Burlington. But the deeper Katie dug, the more she found hints of darkness beneath the gilded surface. There were whispers of union organizers who disappeared, competitors whose businesses mysteriously failed, city officials who died in convenient accidents. The family seemed to exist in a shadow of barely contained violence, their success purchased with more than just shrewd business deals. She found scattered references to family members. Harrison was the current patriarch, having inherited control from his father, Charles. But there were gaps in the family tree that intrigued her, missing branches that seemed to have been deliberately pruned from the official record. One newspaper clipping from 1992 caught her attention. Worthington heir. Missing at sea. The brief article described how Victoria Worthington, Harrison's younger sister, had been presumed drowned when her sailboat was found capsized off the Maine coast. The boat was empty. Victoria's body never recovered. She was survived by her husband, James Mitchell, and their infant daughter. But what made Katie's blood run cold was the accompanying photograph. Victoria Worthington stood on a yacht's deck, her dark hair whipping in the wind, her smile radiant. She was wearing the exact sapphire brooch that now sat on Katie's nightstand. Katie stared at the photograph for a long time, a terrible recognition growing in her chest. The woman's face was hauntingly familiar, not because Katie remembered her, but because she saw echoes of it every time she looked in the mirror. That evening, Katie sat beside Elizabeth's bed in the nursing home, the library printout spread. On the bedside table, her aunt was awake but tired, her left side still weak from the stroke, but her eyes were alert when she saw the papers. "Katie, dear," Elizabeth said, her words slightly slurred but understandable. "What's all this?" Katie pulled out the photograph of Victoria Worthington, holding it where Elizabeth could see clearly. "Aunt Liz, I need you to tell me the truth. Who was my mother, really?" A flicker of fear crossed Elizabeth's weathered face. She struggled to sit up straighter, her good hand reaching for Katie's with surprising strength. "Where did you get this picture?" "From the newspaper archives. Her name was Victoria Worthington, wasn't it? Not Victoria Sullivan." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears, and for a long moment she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I prayed this day would never come. Tell me the truth, please." Elizabeth's grip tightened on Katie's hand. "Your mother wasn't Victoria Sullivan. She was Victoria Worthington, and you're not my great-niece. You're her daughter, Catherine Worthington Mitchell." The words hung in the air like a revelation and a condemnation. Katie felt the world shift beneath her feet as her entire identity crumbled and reformed. "Your mother came to me in the middle of the night," Elizabeth continued, her voice growing stronger as the truth finally spilled out. "You were just 6 months old. She was terrified, running from something or someone. She said powerful people wanted to hurt you both, that she needed to disappear completely. And my father? James Mitchell?" "Dead," Elizabeth said flatly. "Victoria said they killed him when he tried to protect you both. She said her own brother would never let her bastard child live to claim any part of the family fortune." Katie's mind reeled. "Harrison Worthington is my uncle. Victoria said Harrison had always resented her for inheriting equally under their father's will. When she married James, a middle-class marine biologist, instead of suitable society husband, Harrison saw it as a betrayal of the family legacy. But when she had you," Elizabeth's voice trailed off. "What happened to her?" Elizabeth's face crumpled. 2 weeks after she brought you to me, the Coast Guard found her boat. They said it was an accident, that she'd gone sailing alone and got caught in a storm. But Victoria was an expert sailor. She'd been on boats since she was 5 years old." The revelation was staggering. Katie's entire life had been built on a carefully constructed lie, a necessary deception designed to keep her alive. But now that Harrison Worthington knew she existed, how long before that protection failed? The brooch, Katie whispered. What is it really? Your mother said it was more than jewelry. She said it was proof of your father's love and your rightful place in the Worthington family. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should give it to you when you came of age, and tell you to find someone named Walter Finch. Who's Walter Finch? I don't know, Elizabeth admitted, but she said he was the only person who could help you claim what was rightfully yours. She said he'd been your father's research partner and had helped them try to escape. Miles away, in a penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, Harrison Worthington stood before a wall of windows, watching the lights of cargo ships navigate the dark waters his family had once dominated. In his hand was a secure phone, and on the other end was a voice he'd hoped never to hear from again. "The girl has the brooch," said Marcus Webb, the same security specialist who'd been cleaning up Worthington family problems for over 3 decades. "You're certain it's Victoria's?" She described it perfectly, the sapphire, the ship design, even the diamond accents. "It's the one Victoria was supposed to be wearing when she drowned." Harrison's jaw clenched. "How is that possible? We searched everywhere. The body was never recovered, but that brooch should have gone down with the boat. Apparently, she gave it away before she died. The girl was raised by a retired schoolteacher named Elizabeth Sullivan. She must have been the one who helped. Victoria hid the child." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Elizabeth Sullivan had worked as a substitute teacher in some of the private schools Harrison's children had attended. She'd been in the right place at the right time to help Victoria disappear with the one thing that could challenge Harrison's control of the family empire: her daughter. "What do you recommend?" Harrison asked, though he already knew the answer. "The old woman is in a nursing home, stroke victim, not expected to live much longer, but the girl is asking questions, researching the family history. She's becoming a liability." "Then eliminate the liability," Harrison said coldly, "permanently. And the brooch, bring it to me. It's time to finish what should have been finished 32 years ago." As Harrison hung up the phone, he walked to a locked safe behind his desk. Inside was a single item, a yacht's logbook, its pages documenting Victoria's final fatal sailing trip. Of course, the official Coast Guard report showed no such logbook had been recovered from the wreckage. That was because Harrison had retrieved it personally, along with the evidence it contained of his sister's planned escape. Victoria had discovered the truth about how their father had really built the family fortune, through murder, extortion, and the systematic elimination of anyone who threatened their interests. She'd threatened to expose everything, to turn over evidence to federal investigators. And when she'd married James Mitchell and had a child, she'd become more than just a threat to the family reputation. She'd become a threat to Harrison's inheritance. The boat's hull had been deliberately weakened. The storm had been real, but Victoria's death had been anything but accidental. And now, 32 years later, her daughter was threatening to unravel everything Harrison had worked to protect. He looked at the logbook one more time, then placed it back in the safe. Victoria was dead. James was dead. And soon, their daughter would join them. The next morning brought news that made Katie's blood run cold. She arrived at the nursing home to find police cars in the parking lot, and Elizabeth's room cordoned off with yellow tape. "Miss Sullivan?" A detective approached. His expression grim. "I'm Detective Reynolds. I'm afraid there's been an incident." Katie's legs nearly gave out. "Is she—" "She's alive, but barely. Someone broke into her room last night and attacked her. She's in critical condition at the hospital." "Attacked? Who would attack an 83-year-old stroke victim?" "We're investigating. Did your aunt have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt her?" Katie thought about Harrison Worthington's cold threats, but how could she explain without sounding insane? No, she was just a retired teacher. Everyone loved her. But Katie knew better. Harrison Worthington had decided she was a threat, and he was systematically eliminating everyone who could corroborate her story. She had to find Walter Finch, whoever he was, before Worthington's people found her. She spent her lunch break at the library again, this time searching for any connection between Walter Finch and marine biology or the Worthington family. What she found surprised her. Dr. Walter Finch wasn't just any marine biologist. He was a renowned oceanographer who'd spent 30 years studying New England's coastal waters. More importantly, according to his university bio, he'd done his doctoral research on the effects of pollution on marine ecosystems, research that had been funded by a grant from James Mitchell in the early 1990s. Katie found his phone number on the university website and called from a payphone outside the library. "Dr. Finch, my name is Katie Sullivan. I think you knew my father, James Mitchell." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Finch spoke again, his voice had changed completely. "Catherine, dear God, is that really you? You know who I am? I've been waiting for this call for 32 years. Where are you?" "Millfield, Vermont. Stay there. I'll drive up tonight. And Catherine, trust no one else. If you're calling me, it means Harrison knows you're alive." Dr. Walter Finch was a gentleman in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent his life studying the natural world. He found Katie at the diner after closing time and, without a word, gestured for her to follow him to a corner booth where they could speak privately. "Show me the brooch," he said without preamble. Katie pulled it from beneath her shirt. Finch's expression grew sad as he examined the sapphire centerpiece. "I was there when James had it made for Victoria," he said softly. "It was supposed to be a wedding gift, but she was so afraid of her family's reaction that they kept the marriage secret for months. You were friends with my parents?" "James was my research partner for 15 years. We were working on a project documenting the environmental damage caused by Worthington shipping operations, illegal dumping, contaminated fuel, systematic violations of maritime law. We had enough evidence to shut them down permanently." Finch pulled out his phone and showed Katie a photograph, a younger version of himself standing beside a man who looked remarkably like Katie, and a woman she now recognized as Victoria Worthington. "This was taken a week before they died," Finch explained. "Your parents had finally decided to go public with our research. They were going to hold a press conference, turn everything over to the EPA and the FBI. What happened? Harrison found out. He had your father killed first. Made. It looked like a diving accident during one of our research trips. But Victoria escaped with you and our evidence files. For 2 weeks, I helped her stay hidden while we tried to figure out how to protect you both. But Harrison found her." Finch nodded grimly. "She called me the night she died. Said she was going to try to negotiate with Harrison, offered to destroy the evidence in exchange for your safety. I begged her not to trust him, but she said it was the only way to keep you alive. So the boat accident was murder. Harrison never intended to honor any deal. He killed her and took our research, but Victoria was smarter than he gave her a credit for. She'd made copies of everything and hidden them before she went to meet him." Katie's mind raced. "You're saying there's still evidence, after all these years? Your mother hid it in the one place Harrison would never think to look." Finch reached over and gently lifted the brooch, turning it over in his weathered hands. "This isn't just a piece of jewelry, Catherine. It's a key." He showed her a tiny, almost invisible mechanism on the back of the brooch. When activated, it revealed a hidden compartment containing a single item, a waterproof USB drive no bigger than Katie's fingernail. "Your inheritance isn't just a share of the Worthington fortune," Finch said. "It's the power to destroy them completely. The USB drive contained 32 years' worth of carefully documented evidence, financial records showing systematic environmental crimes, recorded conversations detailing cover-ups and bribes, photographs of contaminated coastlines and poisoned wildlife. James Mitchell and Walter Finch had built an airtight case against Worthington Holdings, but the most damning evidence was a video recording made just days before James's death. In it, he and Victoria sat together, looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," James said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes, "it means Harrison has succeeded in killing us, but it also means our daughter survived and she's old enough to learn the truth about her family." Victoria leaned forward, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Katie, we want you to know that you were conceived in love and born into hope. Your father tried to save the environment his family was destroying. When peaceful methods failed, he chose justice over silence." The video continued for another hour, detailing evidence and providing context for the scientific data. By the end, Katie was crying, not just for the parents she'd never known, but for the 32 years of lies that had shaped her life. "What do we do now?" she asked Finch. "We finish what your parents started," he replied, "but we have to move carefully. Harrison has had decades to consolidate his power. He owns judges, politicians, environmental officials throughout New England." As if summoned by their words, Finch's phone rang. He answered with a frown that quickly turned to horror. "What? When? My God! We'll be right there." He hung up and turned to Katie, his face ashen. "That was the hospital. Elizabeth Sullivan died an hour ago. The doctors say it was complications from her injuries, but—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Katie felt her heart shatter. Elizabeth was the only family she'd ever known, and now Harrison Worthington had murdered her just to send a message. "This ends now," Katie said, her voice hardening with resolve. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of running. It's time for the truth to come out." "Catherine, you don't understand the kind of power we're dealing with." "I understand perfectly," Katie interrupted. "My uncle is a murderer who's been covering his crimes for decades, but he made one mistake. He let me live long enough to find out who I really am." The annual Worthington Foundation Environmental Gala was New England's premier charity event, attracting politicians, business leaders, and environmental activists from across the region. The irony of Harrison Worthington receiving an award for environmental stewardship wasn't lost on Katie as she planned her confrontation. Working with Dr. Finch, she'd spent weeks preparing. They'd made copies of all the evidence and distributed them to journalists, EPA investigators, and federal prosecutors across multiple states. But Katie wanted more than just justice. She wanted Harrison to face his crimes in front of the people who'd enabled him for decades. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of Boston's Fairmont Copley Plaza, a glittering showcase of New England's elite. Katie arrived wearing a simple navy dress she'd bought with her final paycheck from the diner, the sapphire brooch prominently displayed at her shoulder. She looked nothing like the society princesses who filled the room, but she carried herself with inherited grace and newfound purpose. She made her way through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments. At the center of it all stood Harrison Worthington, resplendent in white tie and tails, accepting congratulations for his latest environmental initiative. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and Katie saw the exact moment when recognition dawned. In his cold, grey gaze, his practiced smile faltered for just an instant before snapping back into place. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison announced, tapping his champagne flute to call for attention, "I'd like to introduce someone very special who's joined us tonight. My niece, Catherine, who's been missing from our family for far too long." The room fell silent. Katie had planned to make a dramatic entrance, to expose him before he could react. Instead, he'd turned the tables, presenting her as a prodigal family member, trying to control the narrative. "Hello, Uncle Harrison," Katie said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Thank you for finally acknowledging that I exist." "Of course, my dear," Harrison replied smoothly. "Family is sacred to the Worthingtons. We've been searching for you ever since your mother's tragic accident." "Accident?" Katie's voice rose. "Is that what you call murder now?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Harrison's mask of avuncular concern never slipped. "I'm afraid grief and confusion have affected my poor niece," he said, his voice full of practiced sympathy. "Losing one's parents at such a young age, growing up without knowing one's true heritage, it can create elaborate fantasies." "Fantasies? Backed up by 32 years of evidence," Katie shot back, pulling out a small remote control. "Evidence my father collected before you had him killed." She pressed a button, and every screen in the ballroom, meant to display photos of environmental restoration projects, lit up with images from James Mitchell's hidden files. Pollution data, contaminated water samples, recorded conversations about cover-ups and bribes. The crowd watched in horrified silence as Harrison Worthington's voice filled the room, casually discussing environmental crimes and their systematic concealment. "These files contain everything," Katie announced. 32 years of environmental destruction, cover-ups, bribery, and murder, all orchestrated by the man you're honoring tonight. The same man who killed my parents and tried to kill me." Harrison's composure finally cracked. The grandfatherly facade fell away, revealing the cold-blooded killer beneath. "Enough!" he snarled, lunging toward Katie. But he never reached her. FBI agents and EPA investigators poured into the ballroom from every entrance, led by Agent Patricia Walsh, who'd been building an environmental crimes case against Worthington Holdings for 10 years. "Harrison Worthington," Agent Walsh announced, her badge glinting under the crystal chandeliers. "You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, environmental terrorism, and approximately 60 other federal charges." As they led him away in handcuffs, Harrison turned back to Katie, his eyes blazing with decades of suppressed hatred. "You think this ends it?" he called out. "You think you've won? I have lawyers, judges, half the government in my pocket. I'll be free in a month, and you'll be dead in 2. "Maybe," Katie replied calmly, "but everyone here tonight knows the truth now, and tomorrow the whole world will see what the Worthington name really represents." She touched the brooch at her shoulder, the sapphire catching the light like captured ocean water. "This was supposed to be my inheritance, Uncle, but I'm returning it to the sea where it belongs, along with the memory of the family you destroyed." The trials took 4 years, but justice ultimately prevailed. Harrison Worthington was convicted on 63 federal charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He died behind bars at the age of 75, his empire dismantled, and his assets seized to pay for environmental cleanup efforts. Katie inherited what remained of the legitimate Worthington holdings, a modest fortune compared to what had been lost to legal fees and fines. But she used every penny to honor her parents' memory, establishing the James Mitchell and Victoria Worthington Foundation for Environmental Justice. She kept only one property from the vast Worthington portfolio, the family's original estate. On the Maine coast, she converted it into a marine research station, naming it the Elizabeth Sullivan Center for Coastal Studies, in honor of the woman who'd given her a chance at life. On the day the research center opened, Katie stood on the rocky shore where her mother had once sailed, watching Dr. Finch and his team of young scientists collect water samples for their latest pollution study. "Any regrets?" Finch asked, joining her at the water's edge. Katie touched the simple silver chain at her throat. She'd replaced the ornate sapphire brooch with her father's simple wedding ring, the only other piece of jewelry Elizabeth had saved from her past. "None," she said firmly. "My parents died. Trying to protect this coastline, Elizabeth gave her life to protect me. I won't let their sacrifices be meaningless." And what about your future? You could go anywhere now, do anything. Katie smiled, watching a seal surface in the harbor beyond. I know exactly what I want to do. I want to make sure the ocean my father loved is still here for future generations. And I want to make sure no other child grows up not knowing who their parents really were. Your parents would be proud, Finch said softly. All three of them would, Katie agreed, and that's all I need. Katie's transformation from struggling waitress to environmental crusader proves that truth, no matter how deeply buried beneath. Decades of lies and cover-ups has a power that no amount of wealth or influence can suppress. Her story reminds us that heroes don't always come from places of privilege. Sometimes they emerge from small-town diners and nursing homes, armed, with nothing but courage and the determination to honor the sacrifices of those who came before. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the strength to fight for justice and the wisdom to use power responsibly. Katie Sullivan became Catherine Worthington Mitchell not to claim a fortune, but to reclaim her family's true legacy and ensure that their fight for environmental justice would continue for generations to come. If this story of courage triumphing over corruption inspired you, please share it with someone who believes in the power of environmental justice. What would you have done in Katie's place? Stayed hidden and safe, or risked everything to expose the truth about your family's crimes? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that prove the truth will always find a way to surface, no matter how deep it's been buried.